Get out, now!" Richard Lawson hurled the divorce papers across the room, and they scattered across the floor like dead leaves at Emily's feet. Then he grabbed her by the arm hard enough to bruise and dragged her toward the front door of the mansion she had helped him build. "You're nothing, Emily. You were always nothing. A quiet, useless woman I carried for 12 years. He shoved her out into the rain and slammed the door in her face. He thought he had thrown away garbage. He had no idea he'd just thrown a Whitmore into the street. Before we go further, if this story touches your heart, please subscribe and follow it to the very end, and comment the city where you're watching from right now so I can see how far this story has traveled. Emily Carter held the pen above the last page for exactly 3 seconds. Not because she was afraid, not because she was hoping he would take it back. She held it because she wanted to remember this moment forever, the moment she stopped waiting for a man to see her. "Is there a problem?" Richard asked, his voice sharp with impatience. He had a meeting in 40 minutes. He had a new life waiting, and the woman across from him was slowing him down the way he believed she had slowed him down for years. "No," Emily said quietly. "No problem at all." She signed her name, Emily Carter, not Emily Lawson. She had already decided she would take her old name back, the name she had before she met him, before she folded herself into the shape of his ambition, until there was almost nothing left of her. Richard reached over and pulled the papers back the instant the ink dried, as if he thought she might tear them up. His lawyer, a thin man in an expensive gray suit, gathered the documents into a leather folder. The whole thing had taken less than 10 minutes. 12 years erased in less time than it took to order lunch. "The settlement is generous," Richard said, buttoning his jacket. He said it the way a man tosses a coin to a beggar. "The apartment on Elm Street is yours for 2 years. After that, we'll see. And the confidentiality agreement is not a suggestion, Emily. You will not talk to the press. You will not talk to my investors. You will not talk to anyone about anything that happened inside my company. Is that clear?" Emily looked at him then, really looked at him. At the gray creeping into his temples that she used to trim herself with kitchen scissors when they couldn't afford a barber. At the hands that once shook when he pitched his first idea to a room of skeptical men, hands she had held under the table so no one would see how nervous he was. At the mouth that used to whisper, thank you, I couldn't have done this without you," back when he still believed it. "It's clear," she said. "Good." He was already turning away. "Lauren is waiting downstairs. Don't make a scene." Lauren, his assistant. The woman half his age who had started sitting a little too close in meetings, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes, showing up at events on his arm while Emily stayed home because Richard said she didn't fit the new image of the company. Emily had known about Lauren for 8 months. She had known before the flowers, before the late nights, before the hotel receipts she found in his coat pocket and put back exactly where she found them without a word. She had known, and she had said nothing. Not because she was weak, because she was watching. Because there is a kind of woman who, when she is betrayed, does not scream. She takes notes. "Goodbye, Richard," Emily said. He didn't answer. He walked out of the conference room and out of her life, and he did not look back once. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Emily sat alone in that cold, expensive room, and for a moment, just one moment, she let herself feel it. The full weight of 12 years landing on her chest all at once. Then she stood up, straightened her coat, and walked out with her head high. She had no idea that in exactly 41 minutes, everything Richard believed about the world was going to come crashing down. And she had no idea that she was the one holding the hammer. To understand what happened that rainy morning in Seattle, you have to go back, not 12 years, 14, to a small coffee shop near the University of Washington, where a shy young woman with tired eyes sat in the corner every afternoon reading books about business and finance that nobody expected her to understand. That was where Richard Lawson first saw her. He was 26, then broke, brilliant and desperate. He had an idea for a software company that everyone told him was foolish. He had $11 in his checking account and a landlord threatening to change the locks. He walked into that coffee shop because it was warm and he couldn't afford heat in his apartment, and he saw a woman reading a book on venture capital, and he thought at least someone here will understand what I'm talking about. He sat down across from her without asking. "You're reading Peterson," he said, pointing at her book. Chapter 9 is wrong. His whole theory about early-stage valuation falls apart the moment you factor in founder equity. Emily looked up at him slowly. She had a way of looking at people that made them feel measured, weighed, understood. Chapter 9 isn't wrong, she said. You're reading it wrong. Peterson isn't talking about founder equity. He's talking about protective provisions. If you can't tell the difference, you're going to lose your company to your investors before you even build it. Richard was stunned into silence. In his whole life, nobody had ever corrected him like that. Not his professors, not his father, nobody. Who are you? He asked. Nobody important, she said, and went back to her book. He came back the next day, and the day after that. And within a month, this strange, quiet woman who seemed to understand finance better than the professors at the business school became the only person Richard Lawson trusted in the entire world. She helped him rebuild his pitch. She rewrote his financial projections. She sat up with him until 3 a.m, drinking cheap coffee, poking holes in his plans until they were strong enough to survive. He asked her once where she learned all of it. My family was in business, she said simply. I picked things up. He never asked more. That was Richard's great flaw even then. He never asked. He took what she offered, absorbed it, made it his own, and never once wondered what she might be giving up to give it to him. They were married a year later in a courthouse with 2 strangers as witnesses because neither of them had family that came. Emily wore a simple white dress she bought on sale. Richard wore his only suit. They had $32 between them and a dream that most people laughed at. I will never forget this, Richard told her that night, holding her face in his hands. I will never forget that when I had nothing, you believed in me. When this company is worth $1 billion, Emily, it will be because of you. And I will never let you forget how much you mean to me. He meant it. That was the tragedy of it. On his wedding night, Richard Lawson meant every word. But money changes a man. Or maybe money doesn't change a man at all. Maybe it just removes the pressure that was holding his true shape together and lets him spread out into who he always would have been. The first year was the hardest. Richard's company, which they named Lawson Systems, nearly died 4 times. 4 separate occasions, when the money ran out, when the investors got cold feet, when a competitor tried to crush them. And 4 separate times, Emily saved it. She was the one who stayed calm when Richard panicked. She was the one who found the flaw in the contract that would have signed away his controlling interest. She was the one who, when their biggest investor threatened to walk, made a single phone call, a private phone call she never explained, and somehow the investor changed his mind and doubled his commitment. Richard never asked how she did it. He was too busy celebrating. By the 5th year, Lawson Systems was profitable. By the 8th year, it was thriving. By the 10th year, Richard Lawson was on magazine covers being called a visionary, a genius, a self-made man who built an empire from nothing. Self-made. Emily read that phrase in an interview once sitting in the kitchen of their new mansion, and she felt something cold settle into her chest. Self-made. As if she had never existed. As if the late nights and the phone calls and the sleepless worry had all been done by Richard alone. You forgot to mention me, she said that evening, gently, not accusing, just noting. Richard looked up from his phone, annoyed. Mention you in what? The interview. You said you built the company alone. He sighed the sigh of a man being asked to explain something obvious to a child. Emily, come on. It's an image thing. Investors want to see a strong, singular founder, a man who did it himself. That's the story that sells. You know that. You taught me that. I taught you a lot of things, she said quietly. And I'm grateful, he said in a voice that carried no gratitude at all. But the world doesn't need to know every detail. Let me handle the public side. You're better behind the scenes anyway. You're not exactly a spotlight person. You're not exactly a spotlight person. It was such a small thing to say, but it landed like a blade. Because it wasn't a compliment about her humility. It was a way of putting her in her place, behind the scenes, in the shadows, where furniture belongs. Emily said nothing. She had learned by then that saying something to Richard only made him defend himself louder. So she went quiet, and she went to work. Not on the company, on the truth. Because here is what Richard never understood about his quiet wife. Silence in some people is surrender, but in Emily Carter, Silence was patience. Silence was memory. Silence was a woman standing very, very still while the world revealed itself to her one careless mistake at a time. She began to notice things. Small things at first, a discrepancy in a quarterly report, a payment to a consulting firm that didn't seem to exist, a pattern in the way Richard moved money between accounts that made no sense to a normal person, but made perfect sense to a woman who had grown up in a family where wealth was a language spoken at the dinner table. She started keeping copies, not to use them, not yet, just to have them, the way you keep an umbrella not because it's raining, but because someday it might. And then Lauren Mitchell arrived. Lauren was 26, the same age Richard had been when Emily met him, and Emily saw the whole thing coming before it even began. She saw the way Richard's eyes followed the young assistant across a room. She saw him start dressing younger, talking younger, laughing at himself in the mirror, like a man who has decided he is not done being admired. She saw it, and God help her, she understood it, not forgave it, understood it. Richard had spent so many years being told he was a genius that he had come to believe he deserved everything: a bigger company, a bigger house, a younger, more adoring woman, and a quiet, capable wife he could file away like an old document he no longer needed. The betrayal, when it came fully into the open, did not surprise Emily. What surprised her was how little it hurt. She had already grieved this marriage. She had grieved it slowly over years in 1,000 small moments of being unseen. By the time Richard actually filed for divorce, there was almost nothing left to break. Almost. "I want a divorce," he had said 3 weeks before the courthouse. He said it over dinner between bites of steak as casually as a man commenting on the weather. "It's not working, Emily. We both know it. I've grown, and you've stayed the same. I need a partner who fits the life I'm building now." Emily set down her fork. A partner like Lauren. Richard's jaw tightened just for a moment. He hadn't expected her to know. He never expected her to know anything. "Lauren is not part of this conversation," he said. "She's part of everything," Emily said. "But that's fine, Richard. You want a divorce, you'll have one." He blinked. He had prepared himself for tears, for screaming, for a woman on her knees begging him to reconsider which honestly some cruel part of him had been looking forward to. Instead, his wife of 12 years simply nodded and reached for her water glass as if he had asked to change the channel. "That's it," he said, and he couldn't hide the offense in his voice. 12 years and that's all you have to say." Emily looked at him with something almost like pity. "What would you like me to say, Richard?" He didn't have an answer. And that lack of an answer, that hollow silence where his cruelty expected a reward, was the first small crack in the wall of his confidence, though he wouldn't recognize it for weeks. He offered her a settlement designed to insult her, a modest apartment, a small monthly stipend for 2 years, and that confidentiality agreement, the leash he thought he was tying around her neck. His lawyers assured him she would sign it because she had no other options. A woman with no career, no public profile, no money of her own. Where would she go? What would she do? She was, after all, just the quiet wife. Furniture. And you don't negotiate with furniture. You just move it out of the house. What Richard didn't know, what he had never bothered to learn in 14 years of marriage, was who Emily Carter had been before she walked into that coffee shop. He didn't know that Carter was not the name she was born with. He didn't know that she had chosen to disappear. And he had no idea that the moment she signed those divorce papers, she was going to reappear in the most spectacular way imaginable. The morning of the divorce, it rained in Seattle. Of course it did. Emily woke up early in the modest apartment on Elm Street, made herself a cup of coffee, and stood by the window watching the water run down the glass. She was calm, calmer than she had been in years. There is a strange peace that comes to a person when the worst thing has finally happened and they are still standing. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She looked at the screen. One word, ready. She typed back a single word, ready. She had been waiting a long time to send that message, not just weeks, years, since the day she read the word self-made in a magazine and understood finally and completely that the man she married would never see her. Not because she was invisible, but because he had chosen not to look. Emily got dressed, not in anything expensive, a simple coat, a scarf, sensible shoes. She looked to anyone passing on the street exactly like what Richard believed she was, an ordinary woman on an ordinary rainy day. She had no idea as she stepped out into the rain that within the hour she would be watching Richard Lawson's face turn white with a fear he had never known. At the courthouse, everything happened exactly as Richard planned. That was the last time in his life that anything would. He arrived with Lauren on his arm, both of them dressed like they were attending a celebration rather than the end of a marriage. He was cheerful, expansive. He greeted his lawyer with a firm handshake and joked about getting the whole thing done quickly so he could make his lunch reservation. Emily arrived alone. She sat quietly on the far side of the conference room. She did not look at Lauren. She did not glare at Richard. She simply waited. And when the papers were placed in front of her, she signed them without hesitation, which robbed Richard of the satisfaction he had been craving. He wanted her to struggle. He wanted at the very end to see her break so that he could tell himself the divorce was justified, that she really was as weak as he had decided she was. Her calm denied him even that. That was when he said it, the cruelest thing. "You were never anything more than furniture in my house, Emily. Sign it." And she signed. And she stood. And she walked out into the rain with her head held high while Richard watched faintly unsettled, unable to name the strange feeling crawling up his spine. He turned to Lauren. "Let's go celebrate." "That was cold," Lauren said, and there was something in her voice, some flicker of doubt that Richard didn't like. "The furniture thing, you didn't have to say that." "She didn't even flinch," Richard said almost to himself. 12 years and she didn't even flinch. "Maybe she's just tired," Lauren said. But that wasn't it. Richard knew on some animal level that wasn't it. There had been something in Emily's eyes when she signed. Not sadness, not defeat, something closer to relief, as if she had been waiting for this, as if she had been counting down to it. He shook the feeling off and walked out of the courthouse into the rain. And that was when the black SUV pulled up to the curb. It was not an ordinary vehicle. Even Richard, who had spent years around wealth, could tell that instantly. It was the kind of car that comes with a driver in a real suit, and windows you cannot see through, and an air of quiet, absolute power. It glided to a stop directly in front of Emily, who was standing on the sidewalk as if she had been expecting it. Richard slowed. Lauren stopped beside him. The rear door of the SUV opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, silver-haired, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Richard's monthly income at his peak. But it wasn't the suit that made Richard's stomach drop. It was the face. Richard knew that face. He had seen it in the Wall Street Journal and Forbes and Bloomberg. He had studied that face for years, the way a starving man studies a locked pantry. It was Alexander Whitmore. The Alexander Whitmore, chairman of Whitmore Global Holdings, one of the most powerful private investors in the entire country. A man so wealthy and so selective that meeting him was considered the holy grail of the business world. Richard had spent 5 years trying to get a single meeting with Whitmore Global. 5 years of unanswered emails, ignored proposals, and rejected requests. His entire expansion plan, the deal that was supposed to take Lawson Systems from a successful company to a true empire, depended on landing Whitmore money. And he had never even gotten a phone call back. And now Alexander Whitmore was standing on a rainy Seattle sidewalk 20 feet away from Richard, and he was walking directly toward Emily. "That's not possible," Richard whispered. "Who is that?" Lauren asked. Richard couldn't answer. His mouth had gone dry. Alexander Whitmore stopped in front of Emily, and then in front of Richard, in front of Lauren, in front of God, and the rain and the whole indifferent city of Seattle, the most powerful investor in America, reached out and took Emily's hands in both of his. His face, which was famous for being cold and unreadable in every photograph Richard had ever seen, softened into something warm, something tender, something familiar. "Are you ready to come home?" Alexander asked her, and Emily smiled. A real smile, the kind Richard had not seen on her face in years, the kind he had forgotten she was even capable of. "I'm ready," she said. Richard's brain refused to process what he was seeing. His ex-wife, the quiet, ordinary woman he had just called furniture, being personally collected with visible affection by the one man Richard had chased for 5 years and never reached. "Emily," Richard heard himself say. His voice came out cracked and small. "Emily, what is this? Who is this man?" Emily turned to look at him, and in that look Richard finally saw it. the thing he had missed for 14 years. There was a depth in her eyes, a knowing, a power that had always been there and that he had trained himself not to see. "Richard," she said calmly, almost kindly, "I'd like you to meet my brother." The word landed in Richard's chest like a physical blow. You're what?" "My brother," Emily repeated. "Alexander Whitmore. And I suppose it's time you learned my real name. It was never Carter. Carter was my mother's maiden name. I've been using it since I was 22. She paused, and for the first time in 12 years, Richard saw his wife stand at her full height. "My name is Emily Whitmore, and I am the youngest daughter of the Whitmore family." Lauren made a small sound, like the air had been knocked out of her. Richard swayed on his feet. The Whitmore family. The Whitmores were not just wealthy. They were dynasty wealthy. Old money layered on new money, layered on power that reached into government banking technology, every corner of American life. And Emily, quiet, invisible, Emily who bought her dresses on sale and never asked for anything, was one of them, had been one of them the entire time. You never told me," Richard stammered. It was all he could think to say, and it came out sounding as pathetic as it was. "You never asked," Emily said, and there was no cruelty in it. That was the worst part. She said it as a simple fact. "In 14 years, Richard, you never once asked me who I was. You asked me what I could do for you. You asked me to fix your contracts and calm your investors and disappear when it was convenient. But you never asked who I was, because you never wanted to know. You wanted the version of me that was useful and quiet, and I let you have her. For a long time, I let you have her." She glanced up at her brother, then back at Richard. "But I'm done being useful to people who don't see me." Alexander Whitmore had been watching Richard this entire time with an expression of cold, controlled anger, the look of an older brother who had waited a very long time to stand in front of the man who had hurt his sister. "Mr. Lawson," Alexander said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a man who has never in his life had to raise it. "I've heard a great deal about you. My sister, of course, never complained. She never does. But I have my own ways of knowing things, and I know exactly what you called her 14 minutes ago in that building." Richard's blood ran cold. How could he possibly know that? "I want you to remember this moment," Alexander continued. "I want you to remember standing on this sidewalk in the rain. Because I promise you, Mr. Lawson, you will look back on today as the day your life changed. Not because of what my family will do to you." He paused. "But because of what you threw away." And then, without another word, Alexander opened the door of the SUV and helped his sister inside, shielding her from the rain with his own hand, the way you protect something precious. He climbed in after her. The door closed with a soft, expensive thud, and the black SUV pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the gray Seattle rain, taking Emily Whitmore away from the ruins of the life Richard had discarded her from. Richard stood frozen on the sidewalk. The rain soaked through his expensive jacket. Lauren was saying something beside him, asking questions, tugging at his arm, but he couldn't hear her. There was a roaring in his ears. His phone rang. He almost didn't answer it. But it was Grayson, his chief financial officer, and Grayson only called when something was wrong. "Richard," Grayson's voice was tight with panic. "Richard, we have a serious problem." "Not now," Richard managed. "Yes, now. The expansion deal, the financing, it just fell through, all of it. Every single investor in the syndicate pulled out in the last 20 minutes. Simultaneously. Richard, this isn't a coincidence. Somebody made calls. Somebody with real power just killed our entire expansion overnight, and I can't get anyone to tell me who or why." Richard closed his eyes. He knew who. He knew exactly who. 20 minutes. In the time it took Alexander Whitmore to drive his sister away from that courthouse, he had reached out through his vast network and quietly, effortlessly strangled the deal that was supposed to be Richard's greatest triumph, not with threats, not with lawsuits, just with a few phone calls from a man whose voice made billionaires listen. "Richard," Grayson said. "Richard, are you there? What do we do?" Richard looked down the empty street where the black SUV had vanished. The rain fell harder now, cold and relentless, and for the first time in years, Richard Lawson felt the ground shift beneath his feet. He had thought he won. He had thought he was finally free. He had thought Emily was furniture, a burden, a woman holding him back, and that in throwing her away he was clearing the path to greatness. He had been wrong about everything. "Richard," Grayson's voice was frantic in his ear. Richard opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. Because in that moment, standing alone in the rain, with a panicking CFO on the phone and a confused mistress at his side, Richard Lawson understood one terrible, simple thing. The woman he underestimated had never needed him. He had needed her, and he had just handed her every reason in the world to let him fall. Lauren was staring at him now, her face pale, the first real fear showing in her eyes. "Richard," she said slowly, "what did you do? Who was that woman?" Richard looked at her. This girl he had thrown away his marriage for. This girl who was, he realized, in a cold rush of clarity, going to run the moment things got difficult. That woman, he said, and his voice was hollow, was the only person who ever really believed in me, and I just called her furniture. Miles away in the warm quiet of the SUV, Emily Whitmore leaned her head against the window and let out a long, slow breath. Her brother reached over and squeezed her hand. "You did well," Alexander said gently. "You held it together. I'm proud of you." "I don't feel proud," Emily admitted. "I feel tired, Alex. So tired." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "You know I froze his deal. It took 20 minutes. Emily nodded slowly. She had expected as much. Her brother's love was fierce and protective, and it did not forgive easily. "I want you to promise me something," she said. "Anything. Don't destroy him, not the way you want to." She turned to look at her brother, and there was steel in her gentle voice. "I know what he did. I've known for a long time, and there's more you don't know yet, more than either of us imagined. But there are hundreds of people who work for Lawson Systems who did nothing wrong. Families who depend on those jobs. If you burn it all down to punish one man, you punish all of them." Alexander studied his sister with something like awe. "He called you furniture an hour ago, and you're protecting his employees." "I'm not protecting him," Emily said quietly. "I'm protecting the people he forgot to think about, the way he forgot to think about me." She looked back out the window at the rain. "I don't want revenge, Alex. I've never wanted revenge. I want the truth. I want it all brought into the light, and I want him to spend the rest of his life knowing exactly what he threw away." The SUV pulled onto the highway, heading toward the small private airfield where a Whitmore jet was already fueled and waiting. And as the city of Seattle fell away behind them, Emily Whitmore reached into her bag and pulled out a slim folder, a folder she had kept hidden for 3 years, a folder full of copies she had made in the quiet hours when Richard thought she was doing nothing important. Inside that folder was the truth about Lawson Systems, the real truth. The payments that didn't add up, the records that had been altered, the name Lauren Mitchell appearing in places it never should have appeared. And something else, something so much bigger than a cheating husband or a broken marriage, something that reached back to the very beginning of the company, to the money that saved it in those first desperate years, and to a secret Richard had built his entire empire on top of without ever knowing it was there. Emily opened the folder, and she began to read. Because the story of the quiet wife who was underestimated by everyone was not ending on that rainy Seattle sidewalk. It was only just beginning, and the man who called her furniture was about to learn that the woman he threw away had been holding the truth about his entire life in her quiet, patient hands the whole time. Back on the sidewalk, Richard finally raised the phone to his ear. "Grayson," he said, "cancel my afternoon. Cancel everything. I need to see the financials, all of them. Going back to the beginning." "The beginning, Richard. That's 14 years of records." "I know how long it is," Richard snapped. "Just do it." He hung up. Lauren was still standing beside him, and he realized he had almost forgotten she was there. She was shivering in the rain, her expensive coat soaked through her face, a mixture of confusion and something that was beginning to look a great deal like regret. Not regret for hurting Emily. Richard understood that now, watching her. Regret for tying herself to a man who might be about to lose everything. "Richard," Lauren said carefully, "maybe we should talk about what this means. For the company. For us." And there it was. Already. The first crack. The company was wounded, and Lauren was already thinking about herself. "Go home, Lauren," Richard said tiredly. "But we were going to celebrate." Richard looked at her, this girl he had blown up his marriage for, and he felt nothing but a deep, exhausting emptiness. "There's nothing to celebrate," he said. "Go home." He walked away from her into the rain alone. And as he walked, the truth kept turning over and over in his mind, refusing to let him rest. Emily was a Whitmore. Emily had always been a Whitmore. Every time she saved his company, every time she made a phone call that changed an investor's mind, every time she seemed to understand finance better than anyone in the room, it had been because she was born into the most powerful business family in the country. He had built his empire on a foundation he never understood, and now that foundation was walking away from him on the arm of a man who could end everything with a phone call. Richard stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the rain-soaked street, and for the first time since the day he became successful, he thought about who he used to be. The broke, hungry 26-year-old who sat down across from a stranger in a coffee shop and had his whole world changed. The young man who had held his wife's face in his hands on their wedding night and promised he would never forget what she gave him. He had forgotten. He had forgotten everything. And somewhere out there, in a car heading toward a private jet, the woman who had believed in him when he had nothing was reading through the evidence of every lie he had ever told, deciding in her quiet and patient way exactly what she was going to do with the truth. Richard Lawson looked up into the falling rain, and he was afraid. Truly afraid for the first time in years, because he finally understood what he had done. He had not divorced a quiet wife. He had declared war on a Whitmore, and he had done it without even knowing her name. The Whitmore private jet lifted off the runway just after noon, and Emily Whitmore finally let herself close her eyes. But she did not rest. Her hands were still wrapped around that slim folder, the one she had carried in secret for 3 years, and her brother Alexander watched her from the seat across the aisle, with the careful attention of a man who knew his sister was about to do something that could not be undone. "You don't have to open it right now," Alexander said quietly. "We're going home. You can breathe. The files will still be there tomorrow." "No," Emily said. "If I wait, I'll lose my nerve, and I've already waited too long." She opened the folder. For a long moment, she said nothing. She just read, her eyes moving down the pages, and Alexander noticed her jaw tighten with each line. He had seen his sister calm in the face of almost everything. He had watched her sign away 12 years of her life without a single tear. But now, reading these documents, something in her face was changing. "Emily," he said, "what is it?" "It's worse than I thought." Her voice came out thin. "Alex, it's so much worse than I thought." She turned the folder around and slid it across to him. Alexander picked it up and began to read, and within 30 seconds his own expression had gone from concern to something cold and dangerous. "This payment," he said, pointing at a line. "This one right here at the beginning, 14 years ago." "I know." "That's not investor money, Emily. That's family money. That's a wire transfer from a Whitmore holding account into Lawson Systems 3 months before you two were even married." Emily nodded slowly. "I found it 8 months ago. I've been trying to make sense of it ever since." Alexander looked up at her, and there was a terrible question in his eyes. "Did you send this money?" "No," Emily said. "I never touched a Whitmore account after I left. You know that. I walked away from the family money at 22. I wanted to build a life on my own." She swallowed. "So if I didn't send it, and you didn't send it, then someone inside our family did. Someone who knew Richard's company was about to collapse. Someone who saved it in secret and never told either of us." The jet hummed around them. For a full minute, neither of them spoke. "Father," Alexander said finally. The word hung in the air like a struck match. "You think it was Dad?" Emily asked. "Who else had access to that account 14 years ago? Who else would have cared enough to save a struggling little tech company that his estranged daughter happened to be in love with?" Alexander set the folder down slowly. "Emily, if Father secretly funded Richard's company from the very beginning, then everything Richard built, every dollar, every headline, every time he called himself a self-made man, it was all sitting on top of Whitmore money, money he never knew about, money that came from the very family he never bothered to ask you about." Emily felt something turn over in her stomach. She had expected to find lies. She had expected to find Richard's fraud, his hidden payments to Lauren, his altered records. She had prepared herself for all of that. But this was something else entirely. This reached back before the betrayal, before the marriage, all the way to the beginning. "He always said he did it alone," she whispered. "He built the whole company's identity on that story, the broke kid who made it on his own. And it was never true. Not because of me, because of Dad." Alexander leaned back in his seat. "Does Richard know?" "No, I'm certain he doesn't. If he knew he'd been funded by the Whitmore family, he would have told me the moment he found out. He would have used it. He would have leveraged it." She laughed, and there was no humor in it. "The irony, Alex. He spent 5 years chasing your money, begging for a meeting with Whitmore Global, and he already had Whitmore money in his foundation the whole time. He was standing on it." "Then who inside the company knows?" Alexander asked. "Someone had to help hide it. A transfer like that doesn't just disappear from the records. Somebody scrubbed it. Somebody buried it deep enough that even Richard's own CFO never flagged it." Emily was quiet. And then a name rose up in her mind, a name she had not expected. "Grayson," she said. "Richard's CFO. He's been with the company almost from the start. If anyone buried that transfer, it was him." At that exact moment, 400 miles away in the glass tower of Lawson Systems, Grayson was staring at his computer screen with the sick, dawning horror of a man who has just realized the ground is opening beneath him. Richard had ordered the financials. All of them. 14 years going back to the beginning. And Grayson, who had spent those 14 years being the loyal keeper of the company's secrets, knew exactly what Richard would find if he dug deep enough. His phone was already in his hand. He was already dialing a number he had not called in over a decade. "It's me," Grayson said when the line connected. "We have a problem. Lawson is asking for the original books, the ones from year 1. He listened. His face went pale. "No, you don't understand. His ex-wife just got picked up by Alexander Whitmore himself, in person. The Whitmores are involved now. And if they start pulling threads, they're going to find the transfer. They're going to find out where the seed money came from." A long pause. "Yes, that transfer. I need you to tell me what to do." Whatever the voice on the other end said, it made Grayson close his eyes and lower himself slowly into his chair. Back on the jet, Emily's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and frowned. It was a number she didn't recognize. "Don't answer it," Alexander said, but she already had. "Hello, Emily." The voice was female, shaky, whispering, "Emily, it's Lauren Mitchell." Emily's grip tightened on the phone. Across the aisle, Alexander sat up straight. "You have some nerve calling me," Emily said quietly. I know I do. Please don't hang up." Lauren's voice was cracking. "I need to tell you something. About Richard. About the company. I've done things, Emily. Things he told me to do, and I didn't understand what they meant at the time, but now everything's falling apart, and he's going to blame me for all of it. I can feel it. He's already pulling away from me. I'm going to be the one who takes the fall." Emily was silent for a moment. This woman, this girl who had helped destroy her marriage, who had sat too close in meetings and shown up on Richard's arm at events Emily was excluded from. And now she was frightened, and she was calling the woman she had wronged because she had nowhere else to turn. "Why are you telling me this?" Emily asked. "Because you're the only person powerful enough to protect me from him," Lauren said. "And because I looked you up after this morning. I know who you are now. Everyone at the company is talking about it. You're a Whitmore. You could crush Richard with one phone call. But you could also protect me, if I help you." Alexander was shaking his head, mouthing the word no. He didn't trust it. A woman like Lauren offering help the moment things went bad was a woman who would flip again the second it benefited her. But Emily held up a hand to her brother. "What do you have, Lauren?" she asked. "Messages," Lauren whispered. "Financial records. Richard didn't just hide payments to me. He was moving money out of the company for years, setting up accounts overseas, preparing an exit. He knew the expansion was risky. He was building himself a safety net in case the whole thing collapsed. And he was going to leave everyone else, the employees, the investors, holding the bag." A pause. "I have proof. I have all of it. I kept copies because I never fully trusted him, and now I'm glad I did." Emily closed her eyes. This was bigger than she had imagined. Richard wasn't just a man who erased his wife's contributions. He was preparing to loot his own company and abandon hundreds of people who trusted him. "Where are you right now?" Emily asked. "At my apartment. Richard sent me home from the courthouse. He barely looked at me." Lauren's voice broke completely. "I gave up everything for him, Emily. My reputation, my career, and now he's going to throw me away just like he threw you away." And there it was, the truth Lauren couldn't see even as she said it, that Richard threw away everyone, that his cruelty was not personal, it was constant, that the same man who called Emily furniture would without hesitation sacrifice the young woman he had claimed to love the moment she stopped being convenient. "Don't do anything," Emily said. "Don't talk to Richard. Don't answer his calls. Keep those records safe and don't tell anyone you called me. Someone will contact you within 24 hours. "You'll protect me." "I'll make sure the truth protects you," Emily said. "That's the best I can offer. If you were part of the fraud, you'll answer for your part. But if you help bring the whole thing into the light that will matter, it will matter a great deal." She hung up before Lauren could respond. Alexander was staring at her. "You're actually going to work with the woman who slept with your husband." "I'm going to work with the truth," Emily said. "Lauren is just carrying a piece of it." She looked out the window at the clouds passing beneath them. "Everyone keeps thinking this is about revenge, Alex. It's not. It never was. I don't want to hurt Richard. I want to expose what's real. And if the truth happens to destroy him, that's not my revenge. That's just consequence." The jet began its descent toward California. By the time they landed at the private airfield near the Whitmore estate, the sun was low and golden over the hills. A car was waiting, and standing beside that car, leaning on a silver-handled cane, was a man Emily had not seen in almost 3 years. Her father, Charles Whitmore. Emily stopped at the bottom of the jet stairs. Her heart was pounding. She had left this family at 22. She had rejected the money, the name, the expectations, all of it, because she wanted to prove she could build a life on her own terms. And her father, a proud and stubborn man, had let her go with a coldness that had wounded her deeply. They had barely spoken since, and now here he was, old and gray and leaning on a cane, waiting for her at the edge of a runway. "Dad," Emily said. "Emily." His voice was rougher than she remembered, older. "You look tired." "It's been a long day." For a moment, they just stood there, the years hanging heavy between them. Then Emily walked toward him, and she stopped just close enough that he could see her face, and she held up the folder. "I know what you did," she said. 14 years ago, the transfer into Richard's company. I found it." Charles Whitmore's face did not change, but his hand tightened on the head of his cane. "So," he said, "you finally found it." "You saved his company." Emily's voice trembled. "Behind my back. Behind everyone's back. Why? Why would you do that?" The old man was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice had lost its hardness. "Because you loved him," Charles said simply. "You walked away from this family, Emily. You threw away everything I built to go chase a life with a broke boy who ran a company that was 3 weeks from bankruptcy. And I was angry. God, I was so angry with you." He looked down at his cane. "But you were still my daughter, and I couldn't stand the thought of watching that boy's company collapse and take your happiness down with it. So I saved it. Quietly. I never told you because I knew you'd refuse the help. You always did. You were too proud, just like your old man." Emily felt tears rising hot and unexpected. "So everything Richard built started with a father trying to protect a daughter who hated him," Charles finished. "Yes, and that boy took my money without ever knowing where it came from, and he used it to build an empire, and then he called himself self-made, and then he called my daughter furniture and threw her out into the rain." The old man's eyes flashed with a cold fury. "I have been waiting a very long time for the chance to make Richard Lawson understand what he really is, and now at last I have it." Emily's tears spilled over, not for Richard, for her father. For the years they had lost to pride, both of them too stubborn to reach across the distance. For the fact that he had loved her all along secretly from a distance, in the only way a proud man knew how. "You should have told me," she said. "Maybe." Charles reached out and awkwardly, tenderly wiped a tear from her cheek with his weathered thumb. "But you're home now. That's what matters. And we have work to do." That night at the Whitmore estate, 3 generations of the family gathered around a long table, and Emily laid out everything. The secret transfer, Richard's fraud, his hidden offshore accounts, his plan to loot the company and abandon it, and Lauren's offer to hand over the proof. Alexander wanted to move immediately. He wanted to call in every favor, freeze every account, and burn Lawson Systems to the ground with Richard inside it. But Charles held up his hand. "No," the old man said. "We do this properly. We do this legally. We do this in the open." He looked at Emily. "Your sister is right. There are hundreds of people who work at that company who did nothing wrong. We don't punish the innocent to reach the guilty. We build a case. We bring in the board. We expose Richard through the truth, and we let the law and the shareholders do what they will. No shortcuts. No family revenge dressed up as justice." Alexander frowned. "That's slower. It gives Richard time to cover his tracks." "Richard has been covering his tracks for 14 years, Charles said, "and he covered them so well that even he doesn't remember where all the bodies are buried. We don't need to be fast. We need to be right." He turned to Emily. "But I want you to lead it. Not me, not your brother. You. You were the one he underestimated. You should be the one who brings the truth into the light." Emily looked around the table at her family, the family she had walked away from 12 years ago, the family that had, in its stubborn and imperfect way, never stopped loving her. "All right," she said. "I'll lead it." The very next morning, the first phone call was made, not to Richard, not to the press, to the board of directors of Lawson Systems. Emily requested a private meeting. She did not use the name Carter. She used the name Whitmore, and when the board received a formal request for an audience from a member of the Whitmore family, they did not hesitate. They cleared their schedules within the hour. Meanwhile, Richard was drowning. The expansion deal was dead. The investors had vanished overnight. And now, as he pored over the 14 years of financial records he had demanded, he was beginning to see the outlines of something that made no sense. A transfer at the very beginning, $2.4 million. From a holding company he had never heard of, funneled through 3 shell entities, landing in his account exactly when he had needed it most. Back when he was 3 weeks from bankruptcy, and Emily had made that one mysterious phone call that saved everything. That phone call. Richard sat back in his chair, and a cold understanding began to creep through him. "Grayson," he said into the phone, "the seed money, year 1, the $2.4 million. Where did it come from?" There was a long silence on the line. "Grayson," Richard said again, "answer me." "Richard," Grayson said carefully, "I think you should sit down." "I am sitting down. Where did the money come from?" "I don't know the full picture," Grayson said, and it was a lie, and Richard could hear that it was a lie. "But I've always suspected it came from connected sources, sources that wanted to stay anonymous." "Connected to what?" Grayson didn't answer. And in that silence, Richard finally understood. His mind raced backward through 14 years. Emily, who understood finance better than his professors. Emily, who made a single phone call and saved the company. Emily, whose family he now knew was the most powerful business dynasty in America. "It was her," Richard whispered. "The money came from her family, from the Whitmores. She saved my company with Whitmore money and never told me." "Richard, she built everything. From the very first dollar, it was her." Richard felt the room spinning. "And I called her furniture." The full horror of it landed on him all at once. He had not just underestimated his wife. He had built his entire identity, his entire empire, his entire mythology of the self-made man on a foundation that was secretly hers all along. Every headline that called him a genius was a lie. Every award, every magazine cover, all of it rested on Whitmore money and Emily's brilliance, and he had thanked her by throwing her out into the rain. His phone buzzed with a new message. It was from his lawyer. "The board of directors has called an emergency meeting. They've requested your attendance tomorrow morning. They say it concerns the founding financials of the company. And Richard, they've brought in outside counsel, Whitmore counsel." Richard set the phone down with a shaking hand. They were coming for him. The board, the Whitmores, Emily. and they had the one thing he had spent 14 years hiding the truth about where his empire really came from. He thought about running. He thought about the offshore accounts, the safety net he had built for exactly this kind of moment. He could disappear. He could take what he had squirreled away and vanish before the walls closed in. But then he thought about Emily's face on that sidewalk, the calm in her eyes, the way she had said you never asked. And he realized with a sick certainty that she had known about the offshore accounts too. Of course she had. She knew everything. She had always known everything. She had been 3 steps ahead of him for years while he strutted around believing she was nothing. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered it out of pure exhaustion. "Richard." It was Emily's voice. He nearly dropped the phone. Emily, please, Don't," she said. Her voice was steady and quiet. "I'm not calling to hear you beg. I'm calling because tomorrow you're going to sit in front of your board and they're going to ask you questions, and I want you to have one night to decide who you're going to be when they do." "Emily, I didn't know. About the money, about your family. I swear to you I didn't know." "I believe you," she said, and somehow that was worse than if she had accused him. "You didn't know because you never asked. That was always the problem, Richard. Not that you didn't know. That you never wanted to." Richard closed his eyes. "What are you going to do to me?" "Nothing," Emily said. "The truth is going to do it. I'm just the one holding the door open." A pause. "You have a choice tomorrow. You can walk in there and lie and fight and try to bury it deeper, and you'll lose ugly, and everyone will see exactly what you are. Or you can walk in there and tell the truth. All of it. Where the money came from, what you did with it, the accounts you built to abandon your own people. You can take responsibility. It won't save your company. But it might save what's left of your soul." "And Lauren?" Richard asked. "She called you, didn't she? She's turning on me." "Lauren is protecting herself," Emily said. "The way you taught her to, the way you taught everyone around you to. You built a company where the only lesson was that you survive by looking out for yourself and sacrificing whoever's beneath you. Don't be surprised when the people you trained turn those lessons back on you." Richard had no answer for that. "One more thing," Emily said. "My father wants you to know something. He was the one who sent the money, 14 years ago. Not because he believed in you, because he loved me, and he couldn't stand to watch your failure break my heart." Her voice grew very quiet. "You've spent your whole career telling the world you were self-made. The truth is, you were saved. By a woman you erased, and by a father who did it for her sake, and you were never grateful because you never knew. And you never knew because you never asked. Sit with that tonight, Richard, and tomorrow decide who you want to be." She hung up. Richard sat alone in his glass office as the city lights came on below him, and for the first time in his adult life, he wept. Not for the company, not even for himself. He wept because he finally understood the size of what he had lost and the smallness of the man who had lost it. The next morning, the board of directors of Lawson Systems assembled in the largest conference room in the building, and when the doors opened, it was not Richard's lawyers who walked in first. It was Emily. She wore a dark, elegant suit. She carried the slim folder. And beside her walked Alexander Whitmore and the outside counsel, and behind them, quiet and pale, walked Lauren Mitchell, carrying a laptop full of the truth. The board members rose to their feet, not for Richard, who sat frozen at the head of the table, for Emily, for the Whitmore name, for the power that had just walked into the room. Emily took her seat across from the man she had married 14 years ago. She placed the folder on the table. "Thank you all for coming," she said calmly. "My name is Emily Whitmore. Some of you knew me as Emily Carter, the founder's quiet wife." She glanced at Richard, and there was no cruelty in her eyes, only a terrible steadiness. "I'm here to tell you the true story of how this company was built, and I think you'll find it's very different from the story you've been told." Richard opened his mouth, then he closed it, because he had made his choice in the long, dark hours of the night. And as Emily began to lay out the truth document by document, transfer by transfer, lie by lie, Richard Lawson did not fight. He did not deny. He did not try to bury it deeper. He put his head in his hands. And when Emily finished and the board sat in stunned silence, and every eye in the room turned to the man at the head of the table. Richard Lawson lifted his head, looked at the wife he had thrown into the rain, and said the truest words he had spoken in 14 years. "It's all true," he said. "Every word of it. I built nothing, I took everything, and I destroyed the one person who ever believed in me." He looked around the table at the faces of the people he had led, the people he had planned to abandon. "I'm sorry. It's too late, and it doesn't matter, and I'm sorry." The room was silent, and Emily Whitmore, watching the man she had once loved finally tell the truth, felt no triumph, no victory, only a deep and quiet sadness for everything that had been wasted. For the broke young man in the coffee shop who had once held her face in his hands and promised he would never forget. For the person Richard could have been, if only he had ever bothered to ask who she was. She gathered her folder, stood, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped and turned back. "For the record," she said to the board, "I don't want this company destroyed. There are hundreds of families who depend on it, and they did nothing wrong. Whatever happens to Richard, I ask that you protect them." She looked one last time at her ex-husband, small and broken, at the head of the table. "That's the difference between us, Richard. You only ever thought about yourself. I never stopped thinking about everyone else." And with that, Emily Whitmore walked out of the conference room, out of the glass tower, and out of the life of the man who had never once tried to see her, leaving behind the truth she had carried in silence for 3 long years, finally at last brought into the light. The truth did not stay in that conference room for long. By that same afternoon, the story had leaked. Emily didn't leak it. Neither did Alexander. But a room full of board members and lawyers cannot hold a secret that large, and within hours the headlines began to appear. Tech founder's empire built on hidden family money. Richard Lawson, the self-made myth exposed. And then the one that cut deepest of all, the one Emily hated most, because it made her the story instead of the truth. Billionaire's sister was the quiet wife he threw away. Emily read that headline in the quiet of the Whitmore estate and set her phone down with a heavy heart. "They're making it about the wrong thing," she said. Alexander looked up from his own screen. "They always do. People love a fairy tale. The secret princess, the rich brother who came to the rescue." He shook his head. "None of them understand what actually happened." "No," Emily said. "They think the jet saved me. They think the money saved me." She stared out at the hills. "But I saved myself the day I stopped waiting for him to see me. Everything after that was just consequence." Her phone buzzed again. A message from Lauren. Richard just resigned as CEO. Effective immediately. The board pushed him out an hour ago. Emily closed her eyes. She had known it was coming. She had, even in the long hours of the night, tried to prepare herself for the strange grief of it. Because there is a grief that comes with watching someone you once loved lose everything, even when they deserve it, even when you no longer love them. It is not a grief for the man he became. It is a grief for the man he could have been. 3 hours later, Richard called. Emily almost didn't answer. But something in her, some last thread of the woman who had once sat up until 3 in the morning drinking cheap coffee with a broke, brilliant boy, made her pick up. "Emily," Richard said. His voice was ragged. "They pushed me out. It's done. The company I spent 14 years building. Gone." "I heard," Emily said quietly. "I keep thinking there has to be a way to fix it. A way back. And there isn't. There's no way back." A long, shaking breath. "I'm at the house. Our house. The one you designed. I'm sitting in the kitchen you picked out, and I've been sitting here for 3 hours, and I finally understand something." "What's that?" "That every single thing I have because of you. This house, this career, this whole life I thought I built. It was all you, from the coffee shop to the boardroom, and I spent the last few years pretending you didn't exist." His voice broke completely. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything. I know it's too late. But I need you to hear it from me just once before it all falls apart. I'm sorry." Emily was quiet for a long moment. "Richard," she said finally, "do you know why I never told you who I was?" "Because you wanted someone to love you for yourself," Alexander said that on the sidewalk. "That's part of it. But there's more." She took a breath. I didn't tell you because I was testing you. Every single day of our marriage, I was quietly asking myself one question. Does this man see me, not what I do for him, not what I can give him, me? And every day, the answer got a little worse, until one day I stopped asking because I already knew. She paused. You didn't fail a test you didn't know you were taking Richard. You failed a test you took every single day for 12 years, and you never once looked up long enough to notice it was happening. Richard said nothing. On the other end of the line, Emily could hear him crying. I have to go, she said gently. Emily, wait, please. Just tell me one thing. Is there anything I can do? Anything at all to earn even a little of it back? Emily thought about it. She thought about it honestly the way she thought about everything. Yes, she said. There is one thing. When they investigate the offshore accounts, and they will, you can cooperate fully. You can give back every dollar you took that belonged to those employees. You can make sure that not one single person who worked for you loses their livelihood because of what you did. Her voice hardened. You spent your whole life taking. If you want to earn something back, start giving. Not to me, to them. That's the only way you'll ever look at yourself in the mirror again. She hung up. That night, for the first time in 3 years, Emily slept without the folder beside her bed. But the story was far from over, because 2 days later something happened that Emily had not planned for, something that turned the entire situation on its head. It began with a phone call from the outside counsel, a sharp woman named Diane Reyes, who had been leading the investigation into Lawson Systems. Emily, Diane said, we have a problem, and it's not Richard. What do you mean? When we started pulling the offshore accounts apart, we found something. Those accounts Richard set up, the safety net, the exit fund. He didn't build them alone. He couldn't have. Moving that kind of money offshore requires someone with serious financial expertise, someone who knew exactly how to hide it. Diane paused. Emily, the fingerprints all over those accounts belong to Grayson, his CFO. Emily sat down slowly. Grayson. There's more. We traced the original setup of those accounts back 11 years, which means Grayson has been helping Richard move money and hide it for over a decade. But here's the part that doesn't add up. Diane's voice grew tense. Some of that money didn't go to Richard's safety net. Some of it went somewhere else, somewhere we can't trace. Grayson was skimming Emily. He was stealing from the very accounts he was helping Richard steal from, and he's been doing it for years. Emily's mind raced. Does Richard know? We don't think so. We think Grayson was using Richard's fraud as cover for his own. As long as Richard was hiding money, Grayson could hide his own theft inside Richard's shadow. But now that everything's coming into the light, Grayson is exposed too. And a cornered man who's been stealing for 11 years is a dangerous thing. Emily thanked Diane and hung up, and then she sat very still because a memory had surfaced sharp and sudden. Grayson had buried the transfer, the $2.4 million from her father. 14 years ago, someone had scrubbed that transfer from the records, and she had assumed it was Grayson doing it on Richard's behalf. But what if it wasn't? What if Grayson had buried it for his own reasons? What if Grayson had known all along that the money came from the Whitmores and had used that knowledge as leverage for 11 years? She called her father. Dad, she said, the transfer you sent 14 years ago, who did you send it through? Charles Whitmore was quiet for a moment. A financial contact, a young man who worked for one of my subsidiaries. He handled the transfer, discreetly moved it through the shell companies so it couldn't be traced back to me. A pause. Why? What was his name? I don't remember offhand. It was 14 years ago. Then slowly, wait. Yes, I do. Gray. Something. Grayson. Yes. His name was Grayson. Emily felt the floor drop out from under her. Dad, she said carefully, the man you used to send that money 14 years ago, Grayson, he's been Richard's CFO for the entire life of the company. Silence on the line, and then very quietly, that's not possible. It's not a coincidence, Emily said, her mind moving fast now, all the pieces snapping into place. Grayson knew about the transfer because he handled it for you. And then he went to work for Richard. Don't you see? He wasn't hired by chance. He inserted himself. He knew Richard's company had secret Whitmore money in its foundation, and he spent 14 years sitting on top of that secret, using it, stealing under its cover, knowing that if it ever came out, it would destroy Richard and never touch him. Emily's voice was shaking. He's been playing all of us, from the very beginning. My God, Charles said. Emily, if that's true, then Grayson is the most dangerous man in this entire story. Richard is a fool who took what he shouldn't have, but Grayson is a predator who planned all of it. And he knows the walls are closing in, Emily said, which means right now at this very moment, Grayson is trying to disappear. She was right. At that exact moment in the parking garage beneath Lawson Systems, Grayson was loading 2 suitcases into the trunk of his car. He had a flight booked out of the country in 4 hours under a name that was not his own, with a passport he had prepared years ago for exactly this contingency. He had known this day might come. He had always known, and he had planned for it the way he planned for everything, quietly, patiently, 3 steps ahead. But he had made one mistake. He had underestimated Emily Whitmore, the same way Richard had. Because while Grayson was loading his suitcases, Emily was already on the phone with Diane Reyes, and Diane was already on the phone with federal authorities, and the offshore accounts Grayson had spent 11 years building were being frozen one by one faster than he could move the money out of them. Grayson's phone buzzed as he shut the trunk, a notification from his bank, account frozen, then another, and another. He stared at the screen with mounting horror as in real time his entire stolen fortune vanished behind a wall of federal holds. No, he whispered. No, no, no. He dialed a number with shaking hands. Richard's number. Richard, sitting alone in his kitchen, saw Grayson's name on the screen and almost didn't answer. But he did. Grayson. Richard, listen to me. Whatever happens, whatever they tell you, you need to remember that you and I are in this together. We built this, both of us. If I go down, you go down. Do you understand? Richard frowned. There was something in Grayson's voice he had never heard before. Panic. Raw animal panic. What are you talking about? Richard said. What have you done, Grayson? Me, I did what you told me to do. For 14 years, I cleaned up your messes. I hid your money. No, Richard said slowly, and something was dawning on him. No, that's not it. The board is coming after me for the founding money and my offshore accounts. But you're talking about something else, something I don't know about. His voice sharpened. Grayson, what did you do with my money? The line went dead. Richard stared at this phone. And then, in a flash of terrible clarity, he understood. The offshore accounts had always seemed smaller than they should have been. He had assumed it was fees or market losses or his own poor memory of how much he had moved. But it wasn't. Grayson had been skimming, for years, stealing from the man he claimed to serve, hiding it inside Richard's own crimes. Richard laughed, a hollow, broken laugh. He robbed me, he said to the empty kitchen. The whole time, he robbed me. The man who had underestimated his wife had also been blind to the thief sitting beside him for 14 years. Because Richard only ever looked up at the next deal, the next headline, the next conquest. He never looked at the people right next to him, not Emily, not Grayson. He never saw any of them until it was far too late. Grayson made it as far as the airport. He was 3 gates from freedom when 2 federal agents stepped in front of him, and a woman in a sharp suit, Diane Reyes, walked up beside them. Grayson, Diane said, I don't believe we've met, but I've spent the last 48 hours getting to know you very well. She held up a tablet showing the frozen accounts, the traced transfers, the 11 years of theft laid bare. You were very good, I'll give you that. You hid inside another man's crime for over a decade, but you made one mistake. Grayson's face was gray. What mistake? You handled a transfer 14 years ago for a man named Charles Whitmore, and you thought no one would ever connect that young financial contact to the CFO of Lawson Systems. Diane smiled coldly. But Charles Whitmore never forgets a name, and his daughter never stops pulling a thread until she reaches the end of it. Grayson closed his eyes. He was arrested at the gate in front of a crowd of travelers, the great secret architect of a 14-year fraud brought down not by his own carelessness, but by the quiet woman he had never even bothered to fear. When Emily heard the news, she felt something complicated settle in her chest. Not satisfaction, something heavier. Because Grayson's arrest meant the truth was almost fully in the light now. But it also meant that Richard, who she had believed was the villain of her story, was in some ways as much a victim as anyone. A fool, yes, a cruel and selfish fool who had betrayed her and erased her and thrown her into the rain. But also a man who had been robbed and manipulated by someone far more dangerous than himself. It did not excuse what Richard had done to her. Nothing excused that. But it complicated the simple story of villain and victim that the headlines wanted so badly to tell. 2 days later, Richard asked to see her. In person, one final time. Alexander was against it. Charles was against it. But Emily agreed, because she had learned over 3 long years of silence that the only way to truly close a wound is to look at it directly. They met at a small cafe neutral ground, the kind of place neither of them had any memories of. Richard was already there when Emily arrived. He looked older, diminished. The confident, expansive man who had strutted out of the courthouse was gone, and in his place sat someone quieter, humbler, and infinitely sadder. "Thank you for coming," he said. Emily sat down across from him. "You wanted to say something. Say it." Richard nodded. He had clearly rehearsed this, and now that the moment had come, the rehearsed words seemed to fail him. He started twice and stopped, and then finally he just spoke from somewhere raw and true. "I've been trying to figure out where it went wrong," he said, "when I stopped seeing you. And I keep going back further and further, and I realize it wasn't one moment. It was 1,000 small ones. Every time you fixed something and I took the credit. Every time you saved the company and I told the story like I did it alone. Every time you tried to tell me something and I was too busy to listen." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't stop seeing you all at once, Emily. I erased you one day at a time so slowly that I convinced myself you were never really there." Emily said nothing. She let him speak. "And the worst part," Richard continued, "is that I did it on purpose, not consciously, but somewhere inside me I needed the story of the self-made man more than I needed the truth. Because the truth meant I owed everything to you, and I couldn't stand to owe that much to anyone. So I rewrote it. In my own head, I rewrote our whole history until I was the hero and you were just the wife, the quiet one, the furniture." He looked up at her and his eyes were wet. "I made you small so I could feel big, and it worked for a while. And now I've lost everything, and I finally understand that the only thing I ever really had was you, and I threw you away." Emily was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady and kind, but there was no forgiveness in it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "Richard," she said, "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it, because I think it's the most important thing anyone will ever say to you." She leaned forward. "You didn't lose me because I changed. You lost me because you never tried to see me. And now you're sitting here telling me you finally see me, and maybe you do, but do you understand why it took losing everything for you to look up?" Richard shook his head slowly. "Because you only ever looked at things you thought you could lose," Emily said. "The company, the money, the status. Those were the things you valued, so those were the things you watched. But you never watched me because deep down, you never believed you could lose me. You thought I would always be there quiet and useful, no matter what you did." Her voice grew very soft. "That's the cruelest thing about how you treated me, Richard. Not that you didn't love me, but that you were so certain of me that you never bothered to." Richard put his head in his hands and wept, and Emily, watching him, felt the last of her anger drain away, replaced by something quieter and more permanent. Not forgiveness, understanding. She understood now exactly who Richard was, and exactly why he had done what he did. And in understanding it, she was finally free of it. "I'm not going to destroy you," she said. "I told my family I wouldn't, and I meant it. You'll face the consequences of what you did, the fraud, the accounts, all of it. But I'm not going to add to them out of anger. That's not who I am. That was never who I am." She stood up. Grayson stole from you for 14 years and you never noticed because you were too busy looking up at the next big thing. Don't spend the rest of your life doing the same thing. Look down, Richard. Look at the people right next to you. That's where everything that matters has always been. She turned to leave. Emily, Richard said, will I ever see you again? Emily stopped. She didn't turn around. No, she said gently. I don't think you will. But not because I hate you. I don't hate you, Richard. I stopped hating you a long time ago. She glanced back over her shoulder one final time. It's because I finally stopped waiting for you to see me. And a person can't move forward while they're still standing in a doorway looking back. And with that, Emily Whitmore walked out of the cafe and out of Richard Lawson's life for good, leaving behind the man who had underestimated her, the marriage that had erased her, and the long silent years she had spent making herself small enough to fit inside someone else's story. Outside, the sun was shining. Alexander was waiting by the car. He took one look at his sister's face and knew. Are you all right? He asked. I am, Emily said. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, it was completely true. I really am. She got into the car and they drove away, and Emily did not look back. Not because she was running, but because there was finally nothing behind her worth turning around for. Everything that mattered was ahead of her, now waiting to be built on a foundation that was at long last entirely her own. But even as one story closed, another was quietly beginning, because the truth about Grayson had opened a door Emily had not expected. In the frozen accounts in the 11 years of hidden theft, Diane Reyes had found something else. A list of names, other companies, other founders, other people Grayson had touched over the years, other frauds he had helped build and hide. Grayson had not just robbed Richard, he had done it before, many times, to many people. And when Diane laid that list in front of Emily, Emily understood that her fight was not over. It was only changing shape, because somewhere out there were other quiet victims, other people who had been used and erased and robbed by powerful men and the predators who served them. People with no billionaire brother, no family fortune, no jet arriving in the rain to take them home. People who had only themselves. And Emily Whitmore, who had spent 12 years learning exactly how it felt to be invisible, looked at that list of names, and she knew with a certainty that settled into her bones exactly what she was going to do with the rest of her life. The list contained 9 names. Emily spread the pages across the table at the Whitmore estate, and Diane Reyes sat across from her, watching her face carefully. 9 companies, Diane said. Over 11 years. In every single one, Grayson served as an outside financial consultant or a CFO or an advisor. And in every single one, money went missing. Not enough to trigger an investigation, just enough. A skilled thief knows you don't take so much that they come looking. You take a little from a lot of places over a very long time. Emily ran her finger down the list. 9 names, 9 companies. And behind each one, she knew were people. Founders who had trusted the wrong man. Employees who had lost their savings, families who had been quietly bled dry by someone they never suspected. Do any of them know, Emily asked, that they were robbed? That's the thing, Diane said. Most of them don't. 2 of the companies went bankrupt and the founders blamed themselves. They think they failed. They think it was their own bad decisions. Diane's voice grew tight. One of them, a woman named Patricia Hale, lost a company she'd spent 20 years building. She's 61 now. She lost everything, her business, her savings, her home, and she has no idea that the man who advised her was stealing from her the entire time. She thinks she just wasn't good enough. Emily felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. Where is she now? Emily asked. Living with her daughter in Oregon, working part-time at a garden center to make ends meet. Diane paused. Emily, I have to be honest with you. Legally, some of these cases are past the statute of limitations. Some of them we can't prosecute. The money's gone, the trails are cold, and Grayson buried them too well. Bringing these to light might not result in a single conviction. That's not the point, Emily said quietly. Then what is? Emily looked up. The point is that Patricia Hale spent the last few years of her life believing she was a failure, when the truth is, she was robbed. There is a woman in Oregon right now who thinks she wasn't good enough, and she's wrong. She was betrayed, and she deserves to know the difference. Emily's voice trembled. I know exactly what it feels like to believe you're worthless when the truth is someone made you believe it. I spent 12 years like that. Somebody has to tell these people the truth, even if the law can't touch Grayson for it, even if there's no justice at the end. They deserve to know they weren't the problem. Diane was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded slowly. You know, in 20 years of doing this work, I've met a lot of powerful people. Most of them, when they win, they walk away. The fight's over. They got what they wanted. They move on. She gathered the papers. You're the first one I've met who wins, and then goes looking for other people's fights. I didn't win anything, Emily said. I just stopped losing. There's a difference. That night, Emily could not sleep. She sat awake in the dark, thinking about a woman named Patricia Hale, a stranger she had never met working at a garden center at 61 because a man had quietly stolen her life's work. And she thought about all the other Patricias out there, the ones not on any list, the ones robbed by husbands and bosses and business partners, the ones told every single day in 1,000 small ways that they were worthless, that they were quiet, that they were furniture. By morning, she had made a decision. She found Alexander in the study reading the morning reports on Lawson Systems. He looked up when she entered. You have that look, he said, the one Mom used to have right before she rearranged the whole family's life. I'm going to Oregon, Emily said. Alexander set down his tablet. To see the Hale woman. To tell her the truth, and then I'm going to see the others. All 9 of them. Emily sat down across from her brother. And then I'm going to do something bigger, Alex. Something I've been thinking about for years without ever having the courage to say out loud. Tell me. Emily took a breath. I want to build something, not a company, a foundation, for people like Patricia. People like I used to be. People who were used and erased and robbed by the people who were supposed to protect them and who have no family fortune, no powerful brother, no way to fight back. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, the shape of it becoming clear even as she said it. Legal help, financial help, investigators like Diane, a place people can go when they finally realize they were never the failure, they were the target. I want to spend the Whitmore money on the people the Whitmore money would normally never even notice. Alexander studied his sister for a long moment, and then slowly he smiled. Father is going to hate this, he said. He's going to say we're throwing money at strangers with no return. Then I'll convince him, Emily said. No, Alexander said, standing. We'll convince him. Together. He walked around the desk and put his hand on her shoulder. You spent 12 years fighting alone, Em. In silence. Nobody helping you, nobody seeing you. You don't have to do that anymore. Whatever you're building, you're not building it alone. Emily felt her eyes sting. It had been so long since anyone had said those words to her. You're not alone. For 12 years, she had carried everything in silence, the knowledge of Richard's lies, the evidence in the folder, the slow death of her marriage, all of it alone. And now here was her brother telling her the fight was shared. Thank you, she whispered. They went to their father together that afternoon. Charles Whitmore listened to the whole proposal without interrupting, his weathered hands folded on the head of his cane. And when Emily finished, he was quiet for so long that she began to think he would refuse. When your mother was alive, Charles said finally, she used to tell me that money is only worth something when it does something a person can't do for themselves. He looked at his daughter. I forgot that for a long time. After she died, money just became a way to keep score. Bigger companies, bigger deals, winning. He tapped his cane slowly against the floor. I sent that $2.4 million to save Richard's company 14 years ago, and I told myself it was for you. And it was. But it was also the last time I used my money to do something that money couldn't buy me back. To protect someone, just to protect them with nothing in return. He looked at Emily, and his old eyes were wet. Build your foundation, he said. Use every dollar you need. And Emily, when you sit across from that woman in Oregon and tell her she was never the failure, you tell her something else for me. His voice cracked. You tell her that a foolish old man learned far too late that the only wealth that ever mattered was the people he almost let slip away. Emily crossed the room and embraced her father. And for the first time since she was a girl, Charles Whitmore held his daughter and did not let go. 3 days later, Emily flew to Oregon. Not on the jet. On a commercial flight in an ordinary seat because she wanted to arrive as a person, not as a Whitmore. She rented a small car and drove to a garden center on the edge of a small town, and she found a woman in a green apron watering rows of potted flowers. Patricia Hale was smaller than Emily had imagined, gray-haired, tired around the eyes, but with hands that moved among the plants with a quiet competence that told Emily everything about the kind of businesswoman she must have been. "Can I help you find something?" Patricia asked when Emily approached. "Yes," Emily said. "I'm looking for Patricia Hale." The woman straightened, wary now. "That's me. Do I know you?" "No," Emily said gently, "but I know something about you, something you don't know, and I've come a very long way to tell you." She took a breath. 20 years ago you built a company, and a few years ago you lost it, and I know that you've spent every day since then believing it was your fault, that you weren't good enough, that you failed. Patricia's face went pale. The watering can trembled in her hand. "How do you—" "Because it wasn't your fault," Emily said, and her own voice was breaking now. "You were robbed, Patricia, by a man named Grayson who you trusted with your finances. He stole from you for years, a little at a time, and he hid it so well that when your company collapsed, you blamed yourself. But you didn't fail. You were betrayed. There's a difference, and you deserve to know the difference." The watering can slipped from Patricia's fingers and clattered to the ground. She stood frozen among her flowers, this woman who had spent years believing she was a failure, hearing, for the first time, that the story she had been telling herself was a lie. "I don't understand," Patricia whispered. "Who are you? Why would you come all this way to tell me this?" Emily reached out and took the older woman's trembling hands in both of hers, the same way her brother had taken hers on a rainy Seattle sidewalk not so long ago. "Because someone once did the same thing for me," Emily said. "Someone reminded me that I was never worthless, that I was just made to feel that way by someone who wanted me small." She smiled through her tears. "My name is Emily, and I'm here to help you get back on your feet. Not because I want anything from you, but because you were never the failure you were made to believe you were, and it's time somebody proved it to you." Patricia Hale began to cry right there among the potted flowers, years of shame and self-blame breaking apart all at once. And Emily held her, a stranger holding a stranger, two women who had both been told they were nothing, standing together in the truth that they never had been. It was, Emily would later say, the moment her real life began. Not the divorce, not the jet, not the boardroom or the headlines or the fall of Richard Lawson. This. A garden center in Oregon. A trembling woman in a green apron. The truth finally spoken out loud to someone who needed it as badly as Emily once had. Over the following weeks, Emily visited all 9 names on the list. Some received her with tears, some with anger, some with disbelief that curdled slowly into a terrible, liberating relief. Not all of them could be helped in the same way. Not all of their losses could be recovered. But every single one of them received the same gift Emily had given Patricia. The truth. You were not the failure. You were the target. And that truth, Emily learned, was worth more than any amount of money. Because it gave people back the one thing that had been stolen from them, along with everything else. Their belief in themselves. Meanwhile, the case against Grayson moved forward. He was charged with the crimes that could still be prosecuted, and though some of his older thefts were beyond the reach of the law, the sheer weight of the evidence Diane assembled meant he would spend years in prison. The man who had spent his life 3 steps ahead of everyone had finally met someone who was willing to walk the whole distance to catch him. And Richard. Emily kept her word. She did not destroy him. When the investigators came for his offshore accounts, Richard did exactly what Emily had told him to do that night on the phone. He cooperated fully. He gave back every dollar he had hidden that belonged to his employees. He signed away his safety net, the fortune he had built, to abandon his own people, and he directed all of it back into the company to protect the jobs of the hundreds of workers who had done nothing wrong. It did not save him from consequence. He lost his company, his reputation, his fortune, and the mythology of the self-made man that he had built his entire identity upon. But in giving back what he had taken, in finally thinking about the people beneath him instead of the deals above him, Richard Lawson did the first genuinely decent thing he had done in years. Emily heard about it from Diane, and she felt something she had not expected. Not forgiveness, but a small, quiet hope that maybe the man she had once loved in a coffee shop was not entirely gone. That maybe in losing everything he had found the one lesson he had spent his whole life refusing to learn. She never saw him again. She had told him she wouldn't, and she meant it. But months later, a letter arrived at the Whitmore estate addressed to her in Richard's handwriting. She almost didn't open it, but in the end she did. It was short. He wrote that he had taken a job, a small one at a small company doing honest work for an honest wage. He wrote that he had given up the last of what he had to the employee fund. He wrote that he thought about her every day, not with longing, but with a kind of clarity he had never had before. And at the end, he wrote the words that Emily would remember for the rest of her life. The woman I underestimated was the person who believed in me the most. I spent 14 years looking up at everything I wanted to become. I never once looked at the person standing right beside me who was already everything I ever needed. I know it's too late. I'm not writing this to ask for anything. I'm writing it because you deserve to have it in writing from the man who was too foolish to say it when it mattered. You were never quiet, Emily. I was just never listening. Emily read the letter twice, and then she folded it carefully and put it away. Not because she hated him. She had stopped hating him long ago, but because she had finally completely moved beyond him. She walked out onto the terrace of the Whitmore estate, where the hills rolled golden into the distance, and she thought about the long road that had brought her here, the coffee shop, the wedding with $32 between them, the slow erasure one day at a time, the rain on the courthouse steps, the jet, the folder, Patricia Hale crying among the flowers. She thought about all of it, and she understood at last the one truth that everyone else in the story had missed. The jet had not saved her. The money had not saved her. Her family name had not saved her. She had saved herself the moment she stopped waiting for someone else to decide she was worth seeing, and now she was going to spend the rest of her life helping others do the same. The foundation opened its doors 6 months later, and Emily named it after her mother, the Margaret Whitmore Foundation for the Unseen. It was Alexander who suggested the last part, the word unseen. And when he said it, Emily felt it land in her chest like a key turning in a lock. Because that was the whole of it, wasn't it? Every person the foundation would serve had one thing in common. They had been made invisible by someone who benefited from their silence. The launch was quiet. Emily insisted on that. No red carpet, no press event, no billionaire's daughter smiling for the cameras. Just a modest office in Seattle, the same city where she had once been the quiet wife, and a small staff of people who understood the work. Diane Reyes left her firm to run the investigative side. A retired judge came on to lead the legal team. And Patricia Hale, the woman from the Garden Center in Oregon, was the very first person Emily hired. "I don't have any qualifications for this," Patricia had protested when Emily called her. "You have the only qualification that matters," Emily said. "You know what it feels like. You know what these people are carrying because you carried it too. I can hire lawyers all day long. I can't hire that." Patricia came to Seattle, and on the first morning the foundation opened, she stood at the front desk in a new blazer, 61 years old and starting over. And when the first frightened person walked through the door, it was Patricia who took their hands and said the words Emily had once said to her. "You were never the failure. Let us help you prove it." The work was harder than Emily had imagined. For every case, like Patricia's, where the truth could be uncovered and something could be recovered, there were 3 that ended in heartbreak. People who came too late, people whose betrayers had died or vanished or covered their tracks so completely that no amount of investigation could bring the truth into the light. People who wanted their money back or their marriage back or their years back and had to be told gently that some things cannot be returned. Emily learned to sit with those people too, to tell them that even if the money was gone, the truth was still worth having, that knowing you were betrayed rather than believing you failed was a kind of restoration all its own. Not everyone believed her. Some left angry. Some accused her of using them for good publicity, even though there was no publicity, even though she kept the foundation's work as private as she could. And some, the ones who broke her heart the most, simply could not accept the truth, even when it was laid in front of them. They had believed they were worthless for so long that the belief had become part of them load-bearing, and to remove it would have collapsed the whole structure of who they thought they were. "How do you keep going?" Patricia asked her one evening months in after a particularly brutal day. A man had come to them 70 years old, robbed of his retirement by a son-in-law he had trusted, and when they told him the truth, he had refused to believe it, because believing it meant admitting his daughter had married a thief, and that was a truth he could not survive. He had walked out back into a lie, choosing the comfortable pain over the unbearable truth. "I don't always keep going," Emily admitted. "Some nights I lie awake and wonder if I'm doing any good at all, if I'm just a rich woman throwing money at problems that are too big to fix." She looked at Patricia. "And then I remember you, in that garden center, and I remember what your face looked like when you finally understood that you weren't a failure, and I think if I can give one person that, just one, then it's worth all the ones I can't reach." But even as the foundation grew, a shadow was gathering that Emily had not anticipated. It began with a phone call from Diane 3 months in. "Emily, we have a problem, and it's a big one." Diane's voice was tight. "You remember how Grayson's list had 9 names, 9 companies he defrauded?" "Of course. I've been going back through the older records, the really old ones, from before Grayson ever worked with Richard." Diane paused. Emily Grayson didn't work alone. Not at the beginning. When he was young, when he was just learning how to do this, he had a mentor. Someone who taught him how to hide money, how to insert himself into companies, how to steal a little from a lot of places over a long time. Another pause longer this time. Grayson learned it all from someone, and that someone is still out there, still working, still doing it, and he's much, much better at it than Grayson ever was. Emily felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. "Do you have a name?" "Not yet. Grayson won't talk. He's terrified, more terrified of this man than he is of prison, which tells you everything you need to know." Diane's voice dropped. "But Emily, here's the part that scared me enough to call you at home. In going through the connections, I found something. This mentor, whoever he is, he's had contact with the Whitmore family before, recently." Emily's blood went cold. "What do you mean, recently?" "I mean in the last year. Someone connected to this man has been in contact with someone inside your family's financial operation. I don't know who yet. But Emily, I need you to understand what I'm telling you." Diane spoke slowly, deliberately. "The man who taught Grayson everything may already be inside your world. He may already know about the foundation. And a predator like that, when he sees a woman using Whitmore money to expose people exactly like him, he is not going to sit still." Emily gripped the phone. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying be careful. I'm saying the fight you started may be bigger than you knew, and I'm saying that somewhere out there is a man who has spent his entire life staying invisible, and you have just declared war on everything he is." Emily hung up the phone and sat in the dark for a long time. She thought she had reached the end of the story. Richard's fall, Grayson's arrest, the foundation. She thought the fight was won, and the rest of her life would be the quiet, steady work of helping others. But Diane's call had cracked something open. There was a bigger predator out there. A teacher, not a student. And he had a connection to her family that no one had noticed. She went to Alexander first. "Someone inside our financial operation has been in contact with a man connected to Grayson's mentor," she told him. "Diane found it. I need you to help me figure out who." Alexander's face hardened. "You think there's a mole inside the family?" "I think there's someone who shouldn't be there, someone who got close for a reason." Emily leaned forward. "Alex, think about it. 14 years ago, Grayson inserted himself into Richard's company because he knew there was Whitmore money in the foundation. He used that knowledge for 11 years. What if his mentor is doing the same thing, but bigger? What if someone got close to our family the same way, waiting, watching, positioning themselves?" Alexander was quiet, and then slowly he said something that made Emily's heart stop. "There's a man," he said, "Marcus Vale. He came on about a year ago as a senior financial advisor for one of our subsidiaries. Father brought him in personally, said he came highly recommended, that he had a gift for finding value other people missed." Alexander's jaw tightened. "He's been getting closer and closer to the center of things. Father trusts him completely. and M about 6 months ago, Marcus was the one who reviewed the foundation's initial financial structure. He knows everything about it, every account, every dollar, every case we're working on. Emily felt the floor tilt beneath her. Get me everything on Marcus Vale, she said. Everything. Where he came from, who recommended him, his entire history. It took Diane 4 days, and what she found confirmed Emily's worst fear. Marcus Vale doesn't exist, Diane said, spreading the documents across Emily's desk. Not the way he claims to. His references check out on the surface, but when you dig, they're hollow. The companies he supposedly worked for either don't exist or can't confirm he was ever there. His credentials are forged, but forged brilliantly by someone who's done it many times before. Diane looked up. Emily? I ran his financial fingerprint against Grayson's mentor. The way money moves. The patterns, the techniques. She placed a final document on the desk. It's a match. Marcus Vale is the man who taught Grayson everything, and he has been inside your family for a year with access to everything, including the foundation. Emily stared at the documents. A man who had spent his whole life invisible had walked into the most powerful family in America, forged himself a place at the table, and been waiting. For what she didn't yet know. But she knew it was big. You didn't spend a year embedding yourself inside the Whitmore family to steal a little. And then a horrifying thought struck her. Diane, she said slowly, my father brought Marcus in personally. He said he came highly recommended. She looked up. Recommended by whom? Diane's face went pale as she understood the question. She flipped through the file, and when she found the answer, she went very still. The recommendation, Diane said quietly, came through a mutual contact, a financial consultant your father had used once before, a long time ago. She looked up. 14 years ago, Emily. When your father needed someone discreet to move $2.4 million through a series of shell companies to secretly save your husband's failing company. The room seemed to spin around Emily. Grayson, she whispered. My father used Grayson 14 years ago, and Grayson recommended his own mentor Marcus Vale to my father a year ago. She pressed her hands flat against the desk to steady herself. It was never random, Alex, none of it. Marcus didn't stumble into our family. Grayson put him there. This was planned. It's been planned for years. Alexander, who had been listening in silence, stood up so fast his chair fell over. I have to warn Father, he said. Right now. If Marcus is who you say he is and he's had a year of access— No, Emily said sharply. If we warn him openly, Marcus will know we're onto him. He'll run, or worse, he'll accelerate whatever he's planning. We have to be smarter than that. We have to catch him in the act. She turned to Diane. How long until you can build enough evidence to move on him legally? Weeks, Diane said. Maybe a month, to make it airtight. Then we have to keep him comfortable for a month, Emily said. We have to make him believe he's still invisible, still safe, while we quietly build the case that ends him. She looked at her brother. Can you do that, Alex? Can you sit across the table from this man knowing what he is and smile? Alexander's face was cold. For what he's done to this family, for putting Father at risk, I can do more than smile. The next month was the longest of Emily's life. She and Alexander moved carefully, gathering evidence in secret, while pretending everything was normal. Emily even met Marcus Vale in person at a family dinner her father hosted. And she understood the moment she shook his hand why no one had ever suspected him. He was warm, charming, humble. He deflected attention rather than seeking it. He asked questions and listened to the answers. He was in every way the opposite of Richard, and that was precisely what made him so dangerous. He had learned that the best way to steal from powerful people was to make them feel seen, to give them the very thing that men like Richard never gave anyone. Your foundation, Marcus said to her at dinner, his eyes warm with what looked exactly like genuine admiration. It's remarkable work, helping people who were robbed by those they trusted, bringing the truth to light. He smiled. The world needs more people like you, Emily. People who use their power to protect the vulnerable instead of preying on them. And Emily, looking into the eyes of the man who had built his entire life on preying on the vulnerable, smiled back and said, Thank you, Marcus. That means a great deal coming from you. The hypocrisy of it, the sheer breathtaking gall of this predator praising her for fighting predators, nearly made her physically ill. But she held her smile, because she had learned over 12 years of marriage exactly how to sit across from a man who did not see her for what she truly was and give nothing away. The difference was that this time she was the one who saw clearly, and he was the one who had no idea. The trap closed 3 weeks later. Diane had assembled everything: the forged credentials, the financial fingerprint, the pattern of small transfers Marcus had begun moving out of Whitmore's subsidiary accounts, tiny amounts hidden expertly, the beginning of the same slow theft he had taught Grayson to commit, and most damning of all evidence that Marcus had begun quietly positioning himself to gain access to the Foundation's main accounts, the accounts that held the money meant for victims like Patricia Hale. That was the part that broke Emily's heart and hardened it at the same time. Marcus Vale had intended to steal from a foundation built to help people who had been stolen from. He had intended to victimize the victims all over again. "He's going to make his first major move on the foundation accounts this Friday," Diane said. "He thinks he has access. He doesn't know we've been watching every keystroke." "Then Friday is when we take him," Emily said. But Emily wanted something more than a legal arrest. She wanted Marcus Vale to understand in the moment the trap closed exactly who had caught him. She wanted the invisible man to be seen. On Friday, Marcus Vale sat down at his computer to begin transferring money out of the Margaret Whitmore Foundation. And the moment he initiated the first transfer, every screen in his office went dark. And then they lit up again all at once, showing a single image. A photograph of Patricia Hale standing in her garden center in her green apron smiling. Marcus stared at the screen, confused. And then his office door opened and Emily Whitmore walked in, followed by Diane Reyes and 2 federal agents. "Hello, Marcus," Emily said. Marcus's face went through several expressions in the space of a second: confusion, calculation, and then finally a cold, still recognition as he understood that the game was over. "Emily," he said carefully, "I'm not sure what you think is happening here, but that woman on your screen is named Patricia Hale," Emily said, ignoring him. "Your student Grayson robbed her of everything she spent 20 years building. She spent years believing she was a failure. She was 61 and working at a garden center when I found her and told her the truth." Emily stepped closer. "You just tried to steal from the foundation I built to help her. You tried to victimize the victims. And I want you to understand something before these agents take you away." Marcus said nothing. His charming mask had fallen completely now, revealing the cold, calculating emptiness beneath. "You built your whole life on staying invisible," Emily said quietly, "on the belief that if you never sought attention, no one would ever look closely enough to catch you. You taught Grayson that. You believed it about my family. You believed it about me. You looked at the quiet woman running a foundation, and you thought she'll never see me coming." Emily leaned in, and her voice was steel. "But I spent 12 years being the person no one saw. I know invisibility better than you ever will. I know it from the inside. And that's how I saw you the moment you walked into my family. Because it takes one to know one, Marcus. The difference is, I used my invisibility to survive. You used yours to feed." Marcus stared at her, and for the first time, something like fear flickered in his eyes. Not fear of prison. Fear of being truly, completely seen. The one thing a man like him could not survive. "You have nothing," he said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "Whatever you think you have." "We have everything," Diane said, stepping forward. "The forged credentials, the financial fingerprint that matches every fraud you've committed for 30 years, the transfers, and Grayson." She smiled coldly. Grayson decided that spending his remaining years protecting his old mentor was less appealing than a reduced sentence. "He gave us all of it, Marcus, everything you taught him, everyone you did it to. Your student sold you out, just like you taught him to sell out everyone." Marcus Vale closed his eyes. The invisible man, the teacher, the predator who had spent 30 years feeding on the people who trusted him, was arrested in a Whitmore office building, brought down not by a task force or a rival or a stroke of luck, but by a quiet woman who understood invisibility better than he did because she had lived it. That night, Emily sat with her father on the terrace of the Whitmore estate. Charles was shaken. It was one thing to know your daughter had been betrayed by her husband. It was another to learn that you yourself had been infiltrated, that the man you brought to your own table, whose recommendations you trusted, had been a predator planted years in advance. "I brought him in," Charles said heavily. "I trusted him. I put my whole family at risk because a man was charming and told me what I wanted to hear." He shook his head. "I'm an old fool, Emily. I spent my whole life priding myself on being a good judge of men, and I let a snake into my own house." "You're not a fool, Dad," Emily said gently. "You're human. Men like Marcus are good at what they do precisely because they get past even careful people. He got past you the same way Richard got past me, by giving you the feeling of being seen while hiding what he really was." She took her father's hand. "The only reason I saw him is that I've been on the other side of it. I know what it looks like from inside the shadow. That's not wisdom, it's just scars." Charles looked at his daughter and his old eyes filled with tears. "When you left this family," he said, "I thought you were throwing away everything I built. I thought you were weak, running off to marry some boy instead of taking your place in the empire." He gripped her hand. "I was so wrong, Emily. You weren't weak. You went out into the world with nothing and you learned things I could never learn from the top of a tower. You learned what it feels like to be small, to be unseen, to be robbed and told you deserved it. And you turned that into the sharpest weapon this family has ever had." His voice broke. "You're stronger than me. Stronger than your brother. Stronger than any Whitmore who ever lived. Not because of the name. In spite of it." Emily held her father's hand as the sun set over the hills, and she understood that something had come full circle. The daughter who had walked away in anger 14 years ago had come home, not as the girl who left, but as something the family had never had before, someone who knew the world from the bottom as well as the top. In the weeks that followed, the case against Marcus Vale unraveled into something enormous. 30 years of fraud, dozens of victims across the country, an entire hidden career of feeding on the trusting and the vulnerable. And with Grayson's testimony and Diane's evidence, all of it came into the light at last. The foundation grew. The story of what Marcus had tried to do and how he had been caught spread quietly through the circles that mattered. And suddenly, the Margaret Whitmore Foundation for the Unseen was flooded with people. Victims who had spent years in silence, believing they were failures, suddenly daring to hope that maybe, just maybe, they had been targets instead. Patricia Hale became the heart of it. She had a gift. Emily lacked a warmth, an ordinariness that made frightened people feel safe. Where Emily was steel, Patricia was warmth, and together they built something that neither could have built alone. And through it all, Emily never forgot the lesson at the center of everything. She had not been saved by the jet, or the money, or the family name. She had been made strong by the very thing that was meant to break her. 12 years of being unseen had given her the one ability that no amount of Whitmore wealth could buy. The ability to see the unseen in others, the predators and the victims both, to recognize in a single handshake the shadow she had lived in for so long. Richard had called her furniture. He had believed her silence was weakness. Marcus had believed her invisibility made her blind. They had all made the same mistake. They had all looked at a quiet woman and seen nothing there. And every single one of them had been destroyed by the very thing they failed to see. Months later, Emily stood in the Foundation's office watching Patricia comfort a new arrival, a young man who had been robbed by a business partner and had come to them barely able to speak, so crushed was he by the belief that he had failed. And Emily watched Patricia take his hands and say the words and watched the young man begin slowly to understand that he had been betrayed, not defeated. Diane came to stand beside her. "You built something real here," Diane said. "You know that, right? Not just a foundation. A place where the truth lives, where people come to find out they were never as worthless as someone made them believe." Emily watched the young man wipe his eyes. "That's all I ever wanted," she said quietly. "Not revenge, not justice, even though I'll take it when I can get it." She smiled softly. "I just wanted the truth to have somewhere to live, because the truth kept me alive for 12 years when nothing else would, and everyone deserves a place where the truth is waiting for them, ready to tell them the thing they most need to hear. You were never the failure. You were never worthless. You were just standing in the dark, waiting for someone to turn on the light. Diane was quiet for a moment. "Your mother would be proud," she said. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I hope so," she whispered. "I hope she can see it. The daughter she raised, finally standing in the light, and spending every day of her life making sure that other people find their way out of the dark, too." And outside, the Seattle sun broke through the clouds, the same city where a quiet wife had once been thrown into the rain, now home to a woman who had turned all that pain into a light for others, at last fully seen, at last fully herself, at last exactly who she had always been meant to become. 3 years passed. 3 years since Evelyn Marsh was taken from that boardroom in handcuffs. 3 years since the network she had built over 3 decades collapsed into headlines and trials, and finally into a kind of silence, the silence of a wound that has at last been cleaned and allowed to heal. The Margaret Whitmore Foundation for the Unseen had grown into something Emily could never have imagined on that first quiet morning when she opened its doors. Offices in 12 cities now, hundreds of staff, thousands of cases resolved. And behind every single one, a person who had walked in believing they were a failure and walked out understanding they had been a target. Emily was 49 years old now, and she had stopped counting her worth in the ways she once had. But the story was not finished. Because on a cold morning in early spring, Emily received a phone call that pulled her back into the past she thought she had finally left behind. It was Diane. "Emily," Diane said, and there was something strange in her voice, something Emily hadn't heard in years. Uncertainty. "You need to come in. There's someone here, someone asking for you specifically. And Emily, I think you should sit down when I tell you who it is." "Who is it?" A pause. "It's Lauren Mitchell." Emily closed her eyes. Lauren, the young assistant Richard had thrown away his marriage for. The woman who had called her from a place of fear all those years ago, offering evidence, offering to help in exchange for protection. Emily had kept her word back then. Lauren had testified, had handed over everything, and in exchange her cooperation had been noted, her own smaller role in the fraud treated with a leniency she probably hadn't deserved. And then she had vanished. Emily had not thought about her in years. "What does she want?" Emily asked. "She won't tell me," Diane said. "She'll only talk to you. But Emily, she doesn't look good. She looks like someone who's been through something terrible. And she keeps saying the same thing over and over. She says she owes you the truth, the whole truth, the part she never told anyone." Emily's heart slowed. "What part?" "I don't know," Diane said. "But she says it's about Richard, and she says it changes everything you think you know about what happened." Emily drove to the office in a fog. For 3 years, she had believed the story was complete. Richard had fallen. Grace and Marcus Evelyn, all of them exposed. The truth had been brought fully into the light, and now Lauren Mitchell had appeared out of nowhere, claiming there was a piece Emily had never seen. She found Lauren in a small conference room, and Diane had been right. The woman was almost unrecognizable. The young, glamorous assistant Emily remembered was gone. In her place sat a woman worn thin by years of something heavy, her eyes hollow, her hands trembling around a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. "Emily," Lauren said, and her voice broke on the word. "Thank you for seeing me. I know you had no reason to. You said you have something to tell me," Emily said, sitting down across from her. "About Richard." Lauren nodded. She stared into her coffee for a long moment, gathering herself. And then she looked up. 12 years ago, Lauren said, when I called you from my apartment terrified and offered you the evidence against Richard, I told you it was because I was afraid he was going to make me the fall guy." She swallowed hard. "That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. There's something I never told you. Something I've carried every single day since, and I can't carry it anymore." Emily waited. "Richard didn't erase you by accident," Lauren said quietly. "The story of the self-made man, the way he cut you out of everything. I always assumed it was just ego, just ambition, but it wasn't." Her hands were shaking badly now. "Someone told him to do it. Someone was advising him from the very early days to distance himself from you, to hide your involvement, to build a public image that had no trace of you in it." Emily went very still. Who? Lauren met her eyes. Grayson. The room seemed to tilt. I found messages. Lauren continued, the words tumbling out now. Years ago, before everything fell apart. Messages between Grayson and Richard going back to the very beginning. Grayson kept telling Richard the same thing over and over. Keep Emily out of the public eye. Don't let anyone connect her to the company. Build the story around you alone. Lauren's voice cracked. At the time, I thought it was just image consulting, but now knowing what Grayson was, knowing about the Whitmore money he was hiding, I understand what he was really doing. She looked at Emily with anguish. He was keeping you invisible on purpose, because if you'd stayed visible, if you'd been part of the public company, people might have looked into your background. They might have found the Whitmore connection. They might have found the money Grayson was hiding. Your invisibility wasn't just Richard's cruelty, Emily. It was Grayson's strategy. He needed you erased so that his own secret would stay buried. Emily sat back slowly, the full weight of it settling over her. For 12 years, she had believed her erasure was simply the story of a husband who stopped seeing his wife. A personal tragedy, a failure of love, and it had been that. But it had also been something colder and more calculated. She had been made invisible, not only by Richard's ego, but by a thief who needed her in the dark so that his crime would never be discovered. All those years, Emily whispered. I thought Richard just stopped seeing me, but I was being deliberately erased by a man I never even suspected, to protect a secret I didn't know existed. Yes, Lauren said. And Richard went along with it because it flattered him. Grayson gave him permission to be the sole genius, the self-made man, and Richard wanted that so badly that he never questioned why his most trusted advisor kept insisting his wife stay invisible. Lauren wiped her eyes. You were the wall Grayson built around his secret, Emily, and Richard was too vain to notice he was helping build it. Emily was silent for a long time, and then slowly she felt something loosen in her chest. A knot she had carried for so long she had forgotten it was there. Because for 12 years, some small, cruel part of her had wondered if it was her fault. If she had been too quiet, too willing to disappear, too complicit in her own erasure. She had done the work of the foundation. She had told 1,000 victims that they were never the failure, and yet in the deepest part of herself, she had never quite believed it about her own marriage. She had always wondered if she had let herself vanish. And now she understood. She had not vanished. She had been vanished, deliberately, strategically, by forces she never saw for reasons that had nothing to do with her worth. Why are you telling me this now? Emily asked. After all these years. Lauren was quiet for a moment. Because I'm dying, she said simply. Emily's breath caught. I have maybe a few months, Lauren said, and I've spent the last 3 years watching what you built, the foundation, the way you tell people they were never the failure. And every time I read about it, I thought about you sitting in that marriage being deliberately erased, never knowing why. And I thought she, of all people, deserves to know the truth about her own life. She spends every day giving other people the truth. Someone should give it to her. Tears spilled down Lauren's worn face. I did a terrible thing to you, Emily. I helped destroy your marriage. I was young and selfish, and I told myself it wasn't my fault that Richard was the one who was married, not me. But I knew what I was doing, and I've carried it for 12 years. She reached across the table with a trembling hand. I can't undo it, but I can give you this, the truth, the whole truth, so that you finally know completely that none of it was ever your fault. Emily looked at the dying woman across from her. This woman who had once been her rival, her replacement, the symbol of everything Richard had thrown her away for. And she found to her own surprise that she felt no anger, only a deep and aching compassion. Lauren, Emily said gently, do you know what I've learned in all these years of this work? Lauren shook her head. I've learned that the people who hurt us are almost always people who were hurt themselves. That cruelty is a wound passed from hand to hand. Emily took Lauren's trembling hand in both of hers. You were 26. You were dazzled by a powerful man who told you that you were special. You were used, Lauren, by Richard and by Grayson, who was happy to let you become the scandal that distracted everyone from the money. You were a piece of someone else's strategy just like I was. She squeezed her hand. "We were both made small by the same men. We were just made small in different ways." Lauren broke down, completely sobbing into their joined hands, 12 years of guilt and shame pouring out of her all at once. "I forgive you," Emily said quietly. "Not because what you did was small. It wasn't. But because I refuse to spend the years I have left carrying anger for a dying woman who was as used as I was. I forgive you, Lauren. Go in peace." And in that small conference room, two women who had once been rivals held each other and wept, not for the men who had used them, but for the years those men had stolen from them both. Lauren Mitchell died 4 months later. Emily paid for the funeral. She was one of only a handful of people who attended, and she stood at the graveside of the woman who had helped end her marriage, and she felt nothing but a quiet, final peace, the peace of a story that had at last told all of its truth. But the truth Lauren had given her changed something in Emily. It sent her back one final time to the one thread of the story she had left unresolved for 12 years, Richard. She had not seen him since that day in the cafe when she told him she would never see him again. She had kept that promise, but she had heard about him now and then over the years. She knew he had taken that small, honest job. She knew he had given back everything. She knew he had lived quietly out of the spotlight he had once craved, so desperately working an ordinary life for ordinary wages. And now knowing that his erasure of her had been partly orchestrated by Grayson, that Richard had been a vain fool manipulated by a predator rather than simply a cruel man acting alone, Emily found that the last hard edge of her feelings toward him had softened into something she could finally name. Not love. That was long gone, but understanding, and a strange kind of grief for the man he might have been. She found out where he lived, a small apartment in a modest part of the city. And on a gray afternoon 12 years after she had told him she would never see him again, Emily Whitmore knocked on Richard Lawson's door. He opened it, and for a moment he simply stared at her, unable to believe what he was seeing. He was older now, gray-haired, thinner, his expensive confidence long since worn away. But his eyes, when they found hers, filled with a light she had not seen in them in 20 years. "Emily," he breathed. "Hello, Richard." They sat in his small kitchen, and Emily told him what Lauren had revealed. About Grayson, about the strategy behind her erasure, about the way they had both been manipulated by a man neither of them ever suspected. Richard listened in silence, and when she finished, he put his face in his hands. "So even that," he said, his voice muffled. "Even the way I erased you. Grayson was pulling those strings too, and I was too vain, too hungry to be the great man to see it." He looked up and his eyes were wet. "It doesn't make me innocent, Emily. I want to be clear about that. I chose to believe Grayson because I wanted to believe it. I wanted to be the self-made genius. I wanted to erase you. He gave me permission, but the wanting was mine." He shook his head. "I won't hide behind Grayson. I threw you away with my own hands." And in that moment, Emily saw the full measure of how much Richard had changed. The old Richard would have seized on Grayson's manipulation as an excuse, a way to shift the blame to make himself the victim. This Richard refused it. This Richard took his guilt and held it fully without flinching. "I know," Emily said gently. "And I didn't come here to give you an excuse. I came here to give you the truth, the same truth I give everyone who comes to my foundation. You should know exactly what happened to you, what Grayson did, so that you understand your own story completely." Richard nodded slowly, and then he asked the question she knew he would ask. "Was any of it real, at the beginning, before the money and the success ruined me?" His voice was small. "The coffee shop, the wedding with $32, the years when it was just us against the whole world. Was that real, Emily? Or was I lying even then?" Emily was quiet for a moment, and then she gave him the gift of the truth. "It was real," she said. "The boy in the coffee shop who told me Chapter 9 was wrong. The man who held my face on our wedding night and promised he'd never forget. That was real, Richard. You weren't lying then. You meant every word." She paused. "That's what makes it a tragedy instead of just a betrayal. You did love me once. You did see me once. And then success came, and Grayson came, and your own vanity came. And one day at a time, you traded the man who meant those words for the man who called me furniture." She looked at him steadily. "The tragedy isn't that you never loved me. It's that you did, and you let it be taken from you piece by piece until there was nothing left." Richard wept openly now, an old man crying at his kitchen table for everything he had thrown away. "I'm so sorry, Emily," he said. "I know it means nothing now, but I'm so sorry." "It doesn't mean nothing," Emily said softly. "It means you finally understand. And that's worth something. Not to me. I healed a long time ago. But to you. You get to spend the rest of your life as a man who understands what he did instead of a man who never knew. That's not nothing, Richard. That's everything." She stood to leave. At the door, she turned back one last time. "I'm not going to see you again," she said. "This really is the last time, but I wanted you to know the whole truth before we were done. And I wanted you to know that I'm not angry anymore. I haven't been for years." She smiled, and it was a real smile, warm and free. "You didn't lose me because I changed Richard. You lost me because you never tried to see me. But I want you to know I did see you, all the way to the end. I saw the boy in the coffee shop even when he was gone. I never stopped seeing him. That was always the difference between us." And with that, Emily Whitmore walked out of Richard Lawson's life for the final time, leaving behind not a broken man, but a man who finally completely understood. A year later, Emily stood on a stage in New York. It was a business leadership conference, the same kind of event Richard had once attended without her, the kind she had watched from home because she didn't fit his image. Now she stood at the center of it, and thousands of people filled the seats before her, waiting to hear her speak. She had not prepared a speech. She had learned over the years that the truest words came without preparation. 12 years ago, she began, "A man threw me out into the rain and told me I was nothing. He called me furniture. He said I was quiet and useless, and that he had carried me for 12 years. She paused, and the room was utterly silent. He was wrong about almost everything, but he was right about one thing. I was quiet. For 12 years I was silent while a man erased me, and for a long time I believed that silence was my weakness, my shame, the proof that I had let myself disappear." She looked out over the sea of faces. "But I was wrong about my silence too," she said. "Silence can protect you. Silence can give you time to see clearly while others are busy performing. Silence can let you gather the truth in your hands while everyone assumes you have nothing. My silence wasn't weakness. It was the place where I survived. It was where I kept myself safe until the moment came to stop hiding." Her voice grew stronger. "But here is what I need every single one of you to understand. No one should ever mistake silence for weakness, and no one should ever be made to feel that they are worthless by someone who benefits from their silence." She told them the whole story then. Not to shame Richard, not to relive her pain, but because there were people in that room she knew who were living inside their own silence, believing they were nothing, believing they had failed, when the truth was that someone had made them small on purpose. "If you are sitting here today believing you are worthless," Emily said, "I want you to consider the possibility that you are wrong, that you were not the failure, that you were the target, that someone somewhere benefited from making you feel small, and you believed them because you had no reason not to." She leaned into the microphone. "I spent 12 years believing I was nothing because a man I loved told me so, and because a thief I never met needed me to disappear. And the day I stopped believing them was the day my real life began." The room was weeping now. Thousands of people moved by a truth they recognized in their own lives. "They told the story wrong," Emily said. "The newspapers. They said a billionaire's jet arrived to save the abandoned wife. They made it a fairy tale. The rich brother who came to the rescue. The fortune that changed everything." She shook her head slowly. "But the jet didn't save me. The money didn't save me. My family's name didn't save me. I want to be very clear about this because it is the most important thing I will ever say." She let the silence stretch. "I saved myself," Emily said. "The moment I stopped letting someone else decide what I was worth, that is the only rescue that has ever mattered. That is the only rescue that ever will. No jet is coming for most of you, no fortune, no powerful family, And you don't need one, because the power was never in the jet. The power was never in the money. The power was always only in the moment you decide that your worth does not belong to anyone but you. She stepped back from the microphone as the room rose to its feet. And in that moment, Emily Whitmore understood completely and forever the truth of her own life. She had not become powerful when the jet arrived on that rainy morning 12 years ago. The world had gotten that wrong from the very beginning. The jet had not made her powerful. It had only revealed a power that had always been there, waiting patient, quiet, gathering strength in the dark. The quiet wife had never been powerless. She had never been furniture. She had never been nothing. She had never been the failure anyone believed her to be. She had simply been waiting for the right moment to stop hiding, waiting for the day she would stand in the full light and speak the truth that had lived in her all along. And now that day had come and would never end. Richard had thrown away a quiet wife believing she was worthless, and a billionaire's jet had arrived to take her home. But the home she had truly returned to was not the Whitmore estate. It was not the fortune or the family name. It was herself. The self she had protected through 12 years of silence. The self no one had been able to see until she decided to let them. Emily Whitmore looked out over the thousands of people on their feet, wiping their eyes, and she knew that somewhere in that crowd were people who would walk out changed. People who would finally understand that they had been targets, not failures. People who would stop waiting for a jet that was never coming and save themselves instead. That was the only legacy she had ever wanted. Not revenge, not the fall of the men who had wronged her, not even justice, though she had delivered plenty of it. Just this, the truth spoken aloud to everyone who needed it. You were never worthless. You were never furniture. You were never the failure they made you believe you were. You were only ever waiting, like she had been, for the moment you would stop hiding and let the whole world finally see the power that was inside you all along. Emily Whitmore had been that quiet wife once. She would never be quiet again. And that was the truth that no man, no thief, no predator, and no lie could ever take from her. She was seen. She was whole. She was at last and forever entirely her own.